Welcome everyone to the AI for Healthcare session. We're pleased to have you here today. My name is Douglas Todor. I'm a professor in the Faculty of Medicine of the University of Geneva. Together with my colleague at the end, Professor Kerstin Denek from Bern University of Applied Science, we moderate this session. We'd like to give a special thanks to the stellar team of experts that we have here today. Professor Antoine Geisbouler from the University of Geneva and the University Hospital of Geneva, Professor Atinet Sovara from the University of Bern, Professor Edward Choi from the Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology, Professor Jens Klizek from the University of Medicine, Essen, and Dr. Matthew Ahrens from Fine Diagnostics. Additionally, we would like to thank the AI2S2 chairs, in particular Professor Steven Strum, for the opportunity to host the medicine and health-related sessions that we have here today. The AI for Health session aims to explore the current applications, as we've seen earlier today, the main challenge and the outlook of AI in medicine, health, and care. Throughout the session, we will discuss the many potential benefits that AI offers to the healthcare, such as enhanced physician efficiency, improved diagnosis and treatments, and optimized resource allocation. You also critically examine associated AI adoption risks, such as potential errors and harms, biases, inequalities, as well as the need for transparency. Maybe, Kerstin, if you can give us a review how we plan to organize the session.
Yeah, also welcome from my side. So I will introduce you to the structure of the session. So at the beginning, our 5 panelists will have a short introduction of themselves and their research topic. Afterwards, in the second phase, we will ask them some questions. Be prepared. But of course, these questions only serve as food for triggering your ideas and your questions. So please feel free to ask also questions in that phase. And in the third part of the session, we hand over to you in case it's still needed, and the interaction before was not that lively already. So then you have again the possibility to ask questions. So for the next 90 minutes, our plan or our hope is to broaden our and your understanding of AI's impact on healthcare and to engage in stimulating discussions on shaping a responsible and equitable AI-driven future for the medical field. So now we are prepared with water, and I invite the panel members for the first part of our panel, and we will follow an alphabetic order, so the alphabetic order of the first names, so you can think about your names, that I would like to first ask Antoine to go ahead and introduce himself, then Atina, Edward, Jens, and finally Matthew. So please, Antoine.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity. So my understanding is I'm supposed to sort of give a little introduction of who I am and why I'm on this panel, basically. Well, I'm one of the old timers, been in this business of trying to understand how to use intelligently information to improve the production of care, to improve care systems. My initial training is in internal medicine. Then I moved in the field of medical informatics. That's where I did my career at a time where there was a lot of disillusion of the potential of AI. It was what we call the first winter of AI, at least in the healthcare sector. People had been trying to build intelligence systems that could do as well as physicians. The first topic was medical diagnosis, and the idea was that you would go to the system, give the information you had available, and then the system would, produce the answer of the diagnosis. That was really the basis of what had been developed starting in the 1960s to the 1980s. And this model was called the Greek oracle model. You go to an oracle and you ask a question, and you usually get an answer that's very difficult to interpret most of the time. But this model failed. Basically, it never reached a level that was useful enough to complement what humans could do. And so my initial work was really to rethink how, instead of looking for artificial intelligence, we would look for augmented intelligence. So how an artificial tool could augment the capacities of humans, and by creating a conversation rather than creating computation. There was a very nice paper actually from that time from a colleague, Koyera from Australia, who said, when conversation is better than computation. And I think that that's been really the mindset that we've used. And Professor Levis, who's been a long time companion on this journey, have been trying to build systems that facilitate the discussion between humans and computers and intelligent systems. Obviously, things are evolving. We're now in a new summer of AI, especially with the emergence of generative AI systems, and we're starting to look at it with the memories that we have from the old times of how much they are actually going to be able to bring in the system, in particular in improving the decision-making process. And our bias at this stage, considering that it's still a very early technology, is that if we want to use it, there are two conditions. First, we probably are going to use it where it's focused on efficiency of documentation. So basically trying to take away some of the documentation burden that has been put on their professionals and try to automatize as much as we can, but not in the decision-making process, probably mostly in the documentation process, even though that's also quite a challenge. But we are currently in a situation where most care professionals feel quite disillusioned by their profession in general, but also by the administrative tasks and by the information manipulation tasks that they are asked to perform, which they perceive is not the reason why they actually chose those professions. So I think we need to be very active in trying to understand how we can reclaim quality time for those care professionals. And we bet that those technologies, in particular large language models, but also all the developments around natural language processing and others, are going to play a significant role in helping us animate, put some more new magic in the professions, in the healthcare professions. And so I'm now in a position where I'm also I need to take care also about education, and I think that's the second pillar that we need to work on. I think as a dean of the Faculty of Medicine, I'm surprised by the low level of literacy that our students have in digital issues, and I think that's a major issue that we need to deal with, because lots of people know how to use their iPhones, but really having some level of computational thinking, some level of literacy about those tools, their limits, their capacity, how they need to be responsibly used, is something that we definitely need to develop, and that's going to be one of the important developments of the new function I have now as dean of the Faculty of Medicine. Make sure that we produce care professionals that are responsible citizens in a world that is augmented by artificial intelligence. I think that's enough for the introduction.
Thank you, Antoine. So maybe Athena now. Athena, if you want to go, I have your slides here.
Okay, so hello everyone. I would like to thank the session organizers for the work in putting together the session. So I would like to just a couple of figures to introduce myself and give you some food for thought. So I work at the University of Bern, and with my group, we are interested in AI techniques for the field of neurology. So how to analyze neurological signals with the use of AI. So we have a part where we record neurological signals from the human brain in health and disease. And also another part of research where we are analyzing the signals and developing new machine learning algorithms that are specifically designed for the field of neurology. And just to give you two two examples of what this means concretely. So one line of research that we have is investigating neural functions in the absence of consciousness. So in this case, in patients who are in a coma in the intensive care unit, where we are measuring brain responses to the patient's sounds and then using deep learning to classify these responses and prognosticate whether a given patient is likely to survive the coma or not. So this is one example where AI can be used for assisting clinical decision-making and also for augmenting, because a lot of these patients are not able to be diagnosed with existing clinical criteria. Then another case is on sleep disorders, where we are using AI to assist in patient phenotyping. So sleep-wake disorders are affecting a very large part of the population. They are a public health concern these days, but the diagnosis is actually very complicated because of a lot of comorbidities and because often diagnostic criteria are not very well defined. So what we did here is show with artificial intelligence techniques, in this case unsupervised learning, that existing clinical variables that are collected in the clinical practice are not sufficient to diagnose and discriminate all sleep-wake disorders. And last, another line of research that we are pursuing is that we notice there is a lot of work out there about AI for the domain of healthcare. However, it is very difficult to cross the barrier sometimes from research to the clinical reality. So we are also asking the question of what needs to be done as a field to bring AI closer to the patients and to the healthcare practitioners. And in different studies that we do, we are also, first of all, trying to address and understand what causes bias in AI for healthcare. And very last, these are the people who are working in the group at the University of Bern. Thank you very much.
Maybe we move on now. Maybe Ed.
Hi, I'm Edward Choi from KAIST, South Korea, and I'd like to thank the organizers for bringing me here, putting me on the stage to share my opinion. As it says here, I mainly work in AI for healthcare, but I also do natural language processing because medical records usually consist of text naturally, and multimodal learning as well. I did my PhD in Georgia Tech in 2018, and prior to joining KAIST, I was a software engineer slash researcher at Google Brain and Google Health. Just a brief introduction of some of the things that I do. So during my PhD, I mostly focused on developing deep learning models, interpretable deep learning models for dealing with EHR, electronic health records. So one of the kind of a well-known work that I did during my PhD is interpretable healthcare prediction. And ironically, nowadays, I don't feel that strong about interpretability. So I'll have an opportunity to share about that in a few minutes. And as I said, multimodal learning. So we took like X-rays and text as a multimodal pair and then trained neural networks to see if it can understand or ground between two different patterns. One is pixel pattern, the other is textual pattern. And they do, given enough amount of data, they do understand without injecting any domain knowledge, which was pretty surprising. Also, more recently, because of the wave of LLM, large language models, we also are, in our lab, some of the students are trying to develop clinically specifically oriented large language models that usually we kind of trying to use to ask questions or summarize or paraphrase text in clinical notes, such as discharge summaries, nursing notes, physician notes. That's one of the other projects. And right below here, which leads to some of the things, one of the most important things that I think I do is EHR-based question answering. So I'm an engineer, I'm not a physician. So as a purely engineering research perspective, the reason that I do healthcare research is to see if machines can truly understand complex multimodal medical records, and how to evaluate if they actually do understand. So one of the ways that we usually evaluate something, like if we want to evaluate a person, if he knows something, if we want to evaluate a medical student, if he knows something about medical practice, then we usually ask questions. We put them into tests or interviews, and I want to do the same thing with machines. So if the machine understands EHR, complex multimodal EHR, then we should start asking questions about it. And then if it can answer, then we can assume that it understands at least on the surface. So in that perspective, I'm trying to build EHR-based question answering data set, multimodal ones, like not just for table data, but also table and X-ray at the same time. You would need to look at both data, both modalities to answer questions. So we are trying to build that kind of data set for ECG as well, data set for text as well. So like comprehensive multimodal, trimodal, quadmodal question answering data set. That's down the line. And another thing is, yeah, multimodal generative model is also some kind of a side project that I do. So if the model understands multimodal data, then it should be able to draw or generate multimodal data as well, just like DALL-E 2 or Stable Diffusion. So for example, in this particular section here, if we give the model a clinical report, radiology report with one view, can the model generate another view? That would be an interesting question. And it turns out that it actually does pretty well. So given like, given a finding section of mimic CXR, and then also a lateral view, can it generate a PA view or AP view? And it actually does a pretty good job of doing that. And lastly, it's more on the continuation of what I did during my PhD. It's building a predictive model, but rather than focusing on interpretability or injecting domain knowledge, I'm focusing more on scalability, because nowadays everything is about scale. So if we were to build a predictive model based on data set from multiple sites, multiple hospitals, then usually the schema heterogeneity usually is a roadblock, because every hospital has their own EHR schema and the format's all different. And it's really painful to map them into a common data model. So my question is, can we treat all the medical records as a text and then just dump them into the large gigantic model, preferably transformer? And would they be able to understand different formats and overcome different formats of each data set, and then draw some kind of general common knowledge, and then make informative or useful predictions? So that's one of the other things that I do. Yeah, so that will be that's it, and hope to engage with you all in a few minutes.
Maybe Jens, I guess we have the microphone going.
Yeah, hi, my name is Jens Klesig. I'm from Essen. Quite interesting topics, and we're actually working also on similar topics, probably all of you do. Maybe 2 sentences to my background. So actually I'm a radiologist by training, but also a computer scientist, and by heart I'm probably more a computer scientist. But what is really important is I stopped focusing on purely images. So I don't know if you know the saying, we treat patients, not images. So the multimodal aspect is really important. And that's also one of the major focus of our institute. The institute is called Institute for AI in Medicine. And it has several aspects that makes it unique. One of it is it's deeply integrated into the hospital infrastructure. So we are not a computer science institute, which is at the university and not having access to the data. It's quite the contrary. So we're actually an institute of patient care, envisaging that at some point, it will be like when you come into a hospital, you will get a lab test, but you will also get an algorithm test, right? So, and this is already built in our DNA of the institute. The slogan would be code to clinic or bits to bedside. So we develop algorithms or take algorithms and apply them and bring them all the way to the patient, to the point of care. And this is something which we, I think, already did quite well. So we were founded in 2020. I was one of the first 2 employees, and now we are more than 100 employees, also demonstrating the hype of AI, probably. We focused on several things, and AI actually is the tip of the iceberg, so to speak, right? You need to get your infrastructure, the ecosystem right. And it actually starts with the mindset of the people, and then with hardware and software stack. And this was actually also elucidated very nicely in the keynote of this morning, that you need a cloud-based infrastructure. So we invested heavily in this infrastructure, not only on the hardware side, but also on the software stack, using modern cloud technologies. and ETL processes to actually conquer our more than 500 primary systems and make them interoperable. So using standards like FHIR and DICOM to make use of the data at one point. And we have more than 2 billion data points of more than 1.4 million patients and actually in our database. And we can use this data, we can train models, and we can actually also, we have in this framework, we can deploy web applications which can be used on the smartphones of the physicians or in a web browser at the ward. And I think this is something, which is quite unique to Essen. And this is probably one point I wanted to make. And the second point, it doesn't have to be AI to make physicians, healthcare professionals happy, right? So we're talking about AI, and we probably will discuss it a little more in the next minutes or over the next days even. But people still use facsimiles or print out something and then take the note to another point and stuff like this. So I think the workflow optimization, which also has been mentioned earlier, is really an important point. And maybe you can call it AI, but often you don't need it, right? So you just need a digital workflow which is accepted by the people who use it. And this actually brings us to time and money, which probably, I mean, ideally the well-being of the patient should be the main driver, but in reality it's also time and money. And what Philips works on and what was demonstrated are things where you can optimize workflows, where you can save time. And this is very good. So you can either spend the time with a physician or do more examinations in the same time. But what probably is the next step is when we have reimbursement rules at place, when not the physician or the hospital is paying for the algorithms, but a payer, because they're integrated into a standard of care, more or less, right? And like for medications, I always like to draw the similarities of these two lines. If you have a new medication, you need to prove that it works. Actually, if you do a trial and you find out after a while that it's ethically not, ethically you cannot or you should not continue the trial because the new way of treating the patient with a new drug is superior to the traditional way. And I think this is one of the visions I see which will happen in the next years, that we actually will see this for algorithms, that we need to use them to provide better patient care. And at this point, probably also the payers will pay for it. And so it will become standard of care to use these algorithms. And I think that's probably enough for initial statement.
Thank you, Jens. So now maybe moving to Matt.
So, great. Thanks, Douglas, Kirsten, for having us from FINE be a part of this panel. Super exciting group of panelists. I'm Matt Arntz. I'm actually a physician, a pulmonary and critical care physician. My North Star is not AI. It is respiratory care, particularly around tuberculosis, that has sort of guided my career since my academic years in the States. But I'm going to tell you about FINE's work in digital, some of which I'm leading, especially around AI, on a very high level. And I guess what I would say is, for the sake of brevity and time, please come chat with me later if you want to talk a little more about many of the things I don't have time to cover in 2 minutes. So first, FINE, who we are. We're a non-for-profit that was formed in 2003 at the World Health Assembly. And our goal isn't specific to digital, but it's around improving equitable access to diagnostics globally. About half of the world's population doesn't have access to adequate diagnostics. And so we think that's a huge gap in the care cascade for many people. We're based in Geneva, but we have country sites in India, Vietnam, Kenya, and South America. We have ongoing clinical studies across the spectrum of diagnostic development in about 200 sites in 40 countries. And we're a WHO collaborating center on laboratory strengthening and diagnostic technology evaluation relevant to this talk, which I'll talk about in one minute here. And I think importantly, we work in this intersection of industry, policymakers, and health ministries and users to try to accelerate access to appropriate fit-for-use diagnostics. The program I lead is called the Validation Platform. And the way this looks conceptually is we have a virtual environment we've built where we have AI developers who can install their product in this environment in a secure way. We ensure it's functioning the way they want against a set of test images. And then we turn off developer access to the environment, and we pull from all of those clinical sites that I mentioned and all the data that we have to do independent evaluations of how those products work. This is sort of a general representation of it, but one of the sort of more concrete examples is around medical imaging and its use in evaluating chest x-rays for tuberculosis. So FIND used this validation platform and about a data set of about 10,000 images that were from a number of different sites globally to help inform the WHO policy around use of chest x-ray as an alternative to a radiologist in locations, AI for chest x-ray in areas where radiologists weren't available. And that data showed comparable performance. There was some comments about sort of historically the lack of comparability, but some of these AI algorithms do reasonably well and about as good as a radiologist at discerning which x-rays are indicative of TB and which are not. And so, so that data has led us to sort of expand our work in this space. We're working more with the WHO, but also thinking more down the pipeline towards local evaluations with countries and local optimization and threshold setting to help with implementation. So that's like a snapshot of where we are, but happy to chat more with others at the end of the talk. Great.
Thank you, Matt, and everyone in the panel. So now the introduction just set the stage, and we're going to move more to the more interactive part. We're going to do a round of, as Kirsten said, round of questions between me and Kirsten, but feel free to intervene and ask questions meanwhile, okay? So my first question goes to Professor Antoine Gaisgouler, and you touched already a bit of these points. You have been in the field for many years, working in health informatics, telemedicine, and digital health. And as you said, AI and machine learning is not new at all, and not new, but neither a promise. In your opinion, is there a parallel between what is the big buzz that you have now and the past waves? And concretely, where do you think that these new technologies are going to really influence or impact healthcare? And finalizing the question, the challenge for it to happen.
And just make sure, are we focusing on generative AI or AI in general? Because I think, AI is a bit everywhere. And well, the buzz today is generative AI.
That's very good, because when you can start because as you want, but it's also good to set, we were discussing about this because we hear, Steven said before as well, like each person has a view. You can even say like, okay, what is classical AI for you? Feel free to give examples, okay? There's no...
Okay, well, no, AI as, behaviors showing some level of intelligence by computers has been around for decades. And as I mentioned, with limited impact on the care production, the safety of care production, the ability to truly influence decision-making. Very good at generating plenty of alerts, but with, a positive predictive value that is really, really, really bad. So how do we and it's probably not just the technology, it's the way, the framework in which it is implemented. So implementation, having the appropriate data in a form that can actually be interpreted by those algorithms are major challenges. And those are challenges that are still very much in the works in many of the domains. Now, I think with the availability of a lot of data and information in digital form, the ability to process this with ever more powerful computers, the development of those algorithms, those new methods, they definitely promise more and more capacities in terms of how they can make a difference in the production of care. I think a lot of AI is now so embedded in the tools that we don't even see it, and that's what should be happening for a lot of applications. But I think now, if we focus about the latest generation of those tools and the behaviors that they are demonstrating, I think that's opening new ways of thinking of how we can partner with those tools, whether we are professionals, whether we are patients, in order to be able to perform better in the system. And I think that's where I see a lot of potential. I think there is an AI burst, sure. I think we need to see how the technology matures over the next probably few years. It's not going to be in the next few months, so that we can better understand the limitations, better understand the regulation that's needed, better understand the education that is needed so that we can use it in a responsible way. So there are some parallels with the past, but obviously a different dynamics and different level of intelligence that is displayed by those tools. So where it's going to be influencing healthcare, I think you've mentioned it in your introduction. It's going to change how we process information. A lot of healthcare is an information processing domain. That's what we do all the day. We collect information, we try to make decisions based on incomplete and incorrect information, and then we try to communicate this information so that it makes sense to other care professionals, but also to patients and their families. And then we see more and more of this going in both directions, which I think is also something that's been enabled by the availability of information and by AI. So the fact that there is an evolving ecosystem of roles and responsibilities in healthcare is something that is both desirable, but also adds a lot of complexity. And I think those tools are going to be playing a significant role for helping us evolve and move forward. I believe that the way we practice medicine, the way roles and responsibilities are dispatched in the different professions, in the different roles, including patients and the informal carers, is going to be evolving, and this evolution is going to be accelerated by AI. I don't think it's only purely going to be AI, it's really implementation of AI that is going to be the main challenge, as it has been for the last decade. And so the main challenges for it to happen are implementation issues, safety issues, regulation issues, empowering all the stakeholders to really understand what they do with it and what are the potential pitfalls and the limitations. And then I think that was also mentioned in the introduction. How do we make it sustainable by having a business case? So basically, how do we evolve the regulation of our health system so that those tools become recognized as value-added tools that need to be paid for? We've seen that for IT systems, we've seen that for telemedicine, we've seen that for all other applications of digital tools in healthcare. As long as it is not recognized as creating value for the healthcare system and as such reimbursed and regulated properly, it's not going to make most of the difference that it could make. Now, I personally believe that those tools can actually have a very strong impact on healthcare in terms of cost, in terms of reducing medical errors, in terms of empowering patients. But again, this is still work in progress, and I think we're at the right place to discuss this. One of the things that I believe is important and that we're doing quite poorly at this stage is demonstrating impact in a scientific way so that we can go to the decision makers and tell them, see, we've reduced complications by 10%. This is twice as much as the best new medication would do. So, those tools have a real impact, and as such, they should be considered, regulated, and reimbursed properly.
Thank you very much.
I'm looking at the audience, but so far, nothing. Does any one of the others want to say something about these questions or respond to Antoine's response? If not, yes. I think so.
Son.
Okay.
I actually have a question. We brought this up a couple of times since I've been here, and I think about this a lot as well. But why are we not moving towards where we have an evidence-based or clinical impact? What do you think are the reasons we're not getting there, and how would we potentially get there?
Well, it's, I think for simple things, demonstrating that an EKG machine with a rule-based system doing analytics of the signal can produce something that's quite as good as what a junior cardiologist would do. You can design a trial to do so. The problem is that a lot of what we're trying to implement includes systemic changes that are difficult to control, randomize, and so the usual mechanisms that we use for demonstrating the value of an intervention are much more difficult to do when you start involving digital health and probably AI. So, there are lots of papers showing that an AI can analyze a chest X-ray and detect a nodule better and characterize it better than a radiologist. And that part is the easy part, but it's usually very focused on one single task. What we're talking about is we're trying to change more generally how the healthcare is produced, and that's much more difficult. We've been struggling to do that in developing countries, and where we brought those digital tools and try to randomize, one hospital against another. Getting the right number of implemented sites, usually early in the process, is difficult. So you need to already have large-scale implementation so that you can try to demonstrate impact. So it's actually quite difficult because of the systemic nature of the change that we are trying to produce.
Can I add to this quickly? And I also think the point was made earlier today. So we need also a business case or something. So we want to bring research and industry closer together. So for example, if you have a whole body CT scan and we can segment the entire, each voxel in this, or each of these millions voxels in this space, so each and every organ we can segment it. If you would compare it to a human, this would be tremendous amount of time, right? So we estimated that the scan, what we could, or the AI, we do it in 1 to 2 minutes. And usually a physician would need about 1 week to do this. And if we would do this in a trial, no one really would pay for this. So we need a business model in the end, or we need to partner up with industry and they see the business model so that they can scale this algorithm to all the other sites and sell it to others. But yeah, you want to add? Oops.
Yeah, to add to that, because you actually mentioned something before in your introduction that is not being touched upon a lot, and that is the reimbursement part, the role of the payers in this play. Because in the end, and it's not nice to say, but it's about cost. So, and you mentioned that, okay, do hospitals want to pay for something, to invest in something that potentially has big clinical value? Do they have the funds for that? Big question mark. So my question to the panel is basically, if you look at the payers, I could also imagine with the current developments, also the way payers look at reimbursement, maybe they should also change a little bit, because now it takes a lot of time before things are being reimbursed. So what do you foresee as a role of the payers in this changing field?
I think they will play pivotal role in this entire thing. So either the hospitals pay if you, a company, can prove that there's really a time benefit. So you can reduce costs by using the algorithms, or you need some kind of reimbursement. And I think these are the two drivers which will actually also determine the market in the end. And I think.
Well, just to be a bit provocative, I'd like you to think about who has interest of lowering the cost of healthcare. Payers don't. Providers don't, whether they're industry or doctors. The more they do, the more money they make. So the only ones who are really interested are those who have to defend their political career by making sure that the premiums don't increase, and the citizens. And so I think that we've seen that. We've been trying to engage payers and the industry in e-health projects for the last 20 years. And they come to the table to start with, and then they see that that's not going to help with their business, and they walk out. And so I'm a bit provocative, but I think it's obviously, if the system was about how do we contain costs, that we produce the best possible care at the best possible cost, that payers would be at the table and would be engaged. I think for the moment, what we've seen, at least from payers in Switzerland, and probably the situation is different in your country, is that they mostly use those tools to select the best risks, so that other companies have to pay for the worst risks. And that's not what we would like to achieve. So we have a problem, a basic problem of, who is benefiting from a more efficient care system.
So then basically you're touching upon value-based healthcare.
Yes.
And the direction in which basically should go as the world. And there are some developments, but it's going very slowly. So then probably, asking a question back to you, then probably you say then politics should play the pivotal role there and determine the rules around value-based healthcare. Or not?
I totally agree with this approach. I wish our politicians would do that.
I just quickly at a point, maybe if there are alternatives, for example, you could do either a surgery or a biopsy, or you would use AI to determine the result of the surgery. At this moment where the algorithmic treatment or diagnostic would be paid for, I think it would change, because then it might be lower than the surgery and has less complications. And so this would be one niche, how to get in algorithms in the healthcare system, where I think everyone would be happy with.
Yes, maybe. Sorry.
Nicholas Bünger from the Digital Medicine Unit at Bagris University Hospital in Zurich. I'm the representative for the Loop Zurich Consortium. You might know it. We basically put together 4 university hospitals, USZ and Bagris and others. And we want to pull data for research purposes altogether. It's very similar to on a national level, the SPHN. So the question is basically to Professor Geisbuhler. I know you're part of this initiative as a book. And I would like to ask you, of course, we can, in order to do all AI, use AI technologies and so on, we have a more fundamental problem that we have not reached yet, as Professor Choi said before. We have to pull hospitals together with different data models, terminologies, and so on, and make them agree to share data in an anonymized way or whatever. Do you, Professor Geisbuhler, think that we will reach a level of integration of hospitals in the next 5 years, and from then on start to train very interesting AI models? Thank you.
Well, thank you for the question, and it's obviously a great hope that we're going to be able to make data understandable and shareable, fair data for reuse for research, which is the purpose of the SPH and the Swiss Personalized Health Network, a large-scale initiative in Switzerland, really focusing on enabling a critical mass of medical data, clinical data, omics data, signals, imaging, and others to be shared amongst first university hospitals with the vision that all producers of data could eventually join. Well, we've been in the process for 7 years now. We've spent tens of millions, and we have encouraging results, but it's a hard thing because obviously there is a lot of fragmentation. Every hospital has different systems and ways to describe things and ways to encode things, except for a few things that are mandatory from the government. But most of the useful information is not encoded in such a way that it can be easily shared. And then it's the willingness to share, which is still an issue. My data, it's not the patient's data. It's not data that is important for sharing, for making better research. It's my data, my publications, and so this culture has to change as well. And then there is, how do we involve patients? How do we make sure that they consent to this? And we've been working on those issues. I think we are making steady progress. But once again, we are in a very fragmented system, 26 Minister of Health in Switzerland, so 26 different ways of making decisions and priorities and governing the health system. So it's very difficult. I think other countries are doing a bit better. Not all of them, but quite a few are. But this vision, more and more, that we need to converge between information that is produced for healthcare, that can be made shareable, agreed by the citizens and the patient that it should be shared on their behalf, and then making it reusable for biomedical research, but also for public health. I think there is now an evolution in culture, including at the policymakers and the decision makers, that this is the way forward. So I'm overly optimistic, as I've always been. We started 20 years ago thinking it would be a 5-year project, and it's still, it's in infancy. But it's a lot of cultural change. But my guess, and maybe Professor Lovis can comment on this because he's involved in those discussions, we're going in this direction.
Merci. Yes, I think we are going in that direction. I think there are good reasons to be optimistic, but I think we are facing a few fundamental barriers. The first one, which you raised before, Antoine, is about adoption. And I would remind you that in Germany, apps are recognized now as a therapeutic mean, and they are reimbursed, and it doesn't work. And it is not a failure because it's not reimbursed. It's not a failure because it's not used. Patients don't use it, and doctors don't prescribe it, despite the fact that doctors would win more at doing that prescription, and patients would win also at doing that prescription. So it's not just about payers. It's also about a culture change. It's about a culture change of care professionals and patients and citizens. So this is my first remark. My second remark is that we have the SPHN in Switzerland, and we have the global sales data space in Europe. And both of them, they are fighting still today to include in the regulation some homologation process for the people building the IT, for the people building the lab automate, for the people building medical devices to comply, to be enforced, to comply to some interoperability standards. And this is not allowed now. It is fighted and it's fighted by the industry, which is a problem. And in Switzerland, the DG Santé, which is going to introduce a major regulatory change, will force the data provider, hospitals, doctors, nurses, whatever, to comply to the standard, but not the people selling the product to the care providers, which is completely bizarre. And because there is a strong lobby, IG Health, I say it if it's recorded, in Switzerland, which is fighting this minimal mandatory standards since 15 years in Switzerland.
To say so a bit less optimistic than I am.
So thanks for the questions and your comments, Antoine. I will go now to another topic that was already mentioned in the keynote: responsible AI and bias. So Atina, you mentioned that you did research, or you're doing research related to bias AI. And my question is actually, how can we ensure responsible AI development and deployment in your field, neuroscience research, to foster inclusive and equitable advancement in the field, and how can we actually mitigate biased AI models?
Thank you. Very important questions, both of those. And it's great that we heard about them this morning's keynote. We heard a little bit about bias and what we can do to mitigate bias. And what I would like to argue is that to mitigate bias, the first thing we need to do is actually try to understand bias in AI and healthcare, and trying to understand where it's coming from, because it's a multifaceted issue. So first of all, it starts with humans. It starts with human perception. So our brains like to abstract and categorize, and that's okay because it helps us to interact with the world. But then the problem is when this abstraction comes to the level of the prejudice. And the medical field is unfortunately quite known to have histories of bias and prejudice. Just for example, when clinicians interact with patients, they are likely to underestimate the pain if it is reported from women patients than from men. And there are a lot of examples like that in the medical field. So already bias starts with the interaction, without any data, without any AI. And then comes the data. And there we also have a lot of different levels and sources of bias. So for example, in some cases, the bias can start already at the level of the collection of the data. When we think of pulse oximeters, which measure oxygen level in the blood by shedding infrared light on the skin, these are known to underperform for patients with darker skin colors. So this is already a biased measurement, and this can give erroneous outputs. And this is a very standard measurement that is applied in hospitals. So that's already at the level of the measurement. Similar cases have also been reported with electroencephalography, where we measure electrical activity of the brain from the scalp with electrodes that we place on the scalp. So patients, for example, with thicker hair or coarse hair, we may have problems record EEG signals from those patients. So this is at the level of the measurement. And then moving from the measurement, we can think of the data themselves. And there we often have data gaps. So we have parts of the population that are not represented in our data sets. So we talk already about initiatives to share data and collect data and have interoperable data. But then we also have to ask the question of which patients do this data represent. And this is not specific to AI or medical field. It is something that has been observed already and reported in 2010 in the field of psychology, where it was coined as a term that psychology studies represent very weird individuals. And this stands for Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic individuals. And this came from the observation that studies in psychology, the participants for these studies are mainly students of psychology who have this very stereotypical profile. And this is not limited to psychology, but it applies to a lot of different research fields. And because a lot of the data we use are generated by research studies, they will also reflect very narrow parts of the population. So we also have to be mindful of who is taking part in our research. And also very recently this year, there was a study published that shows that even choosing to take part in a research study and choosing to sharing your data can also be genetically determined. So there are genetic traits that determine whether you're likely to take part in research studies. And of course, this will vary with socioeconomic factors and other factors that we know in terms of participation, but these are also important to keep in mind. So then this is at the level of the data. And when we talk also about data at the medical field, sometimes it's even very difficult to quantify bias. So one of the most common examples of bias in AI is that in face recognition, where we know that AI algorithms for face recognition underperform for Black women. But there we actually know it because we can infer, at least at some level, ethnicity from the skin color of a person to a very abstract level. But in the medical field, very often, this is not even possible. So when we work with images of the brain or signals from the brain, then we don't know what profile the patient has unless this information has explicitly been collected as metadata. So even to address this, some biases, we may have all the willingness to do so, but we need to know what kind of biases we have in the data set. So what this means is that we need to collect inclusive data, and we need to be able to address bias in AI by design. It's not a byproduct that we can do that we can always do afterwards. In some cases, it's possible, but we need to start thinking about it already at the level of data collection, or even at the level of designing sensors for collecting data in some cases. So we have all these different facets, and we kind of pile them together. They don't always apply to all applications and all AI all AI applications we can think of, but sometimes they do accumulate. So then we have all this data that carry biases along the way, and we feed those to an AI algorithm, well, the algorithm can be only as good as the data we use to train that algorithm. So then it's no surprise that the output of this algorithm may also be biased. And today there is actually a lot of work being done at the level of the algorithms for how to debias them. And we heard this morning about federated learning. We heard about synthetic data and data augmentations. And there are a lot of intelligent people out there working on these questions. But what we actually need to think about is a cultural change also about the topics of bias and AI, where we already design inclusive data sets, where we encourage participants to share their data and try to understand why they may be reluctant to do so in cases where they are, and also have interoperable data and exchange algorithms. And then very last, I also like to shift this narrative a little bit, because we always talk about bias in AI in negative terms. But actually, we shouldn't also forget that AI helps us in overcoming a lot of human biases. So from my field, the field of neurology or sleep research, for example, one very common case where we are developing a lot of AI algorithms as a field is that of sleep scoring. So identifying overnight what kind of sleep stages a patient goes through. And this is a task that today can be automated by AI algorithms. But humans are very biased at this task. So the inter-rater agreement is about 70 to 80%. So this is also a case where AI can help us, at least in having some standards and automating and having some increasing at least the replicability of sleep scoring and also of other diagnoses where even human experts cannot agree with each other. So this is also to think of it in positive terms, that AI could help us overcome existing and known biases, and not only as a negative thing. It's something we have to live with in positive and negative ways as well.
Thank you very much, Athena. Maybe I'm going to change a bit the topic here, because so that we can go over the whole panel, and then we can come back maybe to the topic of bias. One thing that we've seen in the previous presentation on the first day was the domination of the industry. For example, there is this recent paper published in Science entitled "The Growing Influence of Industry in AI Research," and that they also show that evidence that the industry increasingly dominates the three key ingredients of AI that we saw also on the first days on the keynotes and discussions: computing power, large data sets, and high-skilled researchers. And then this question initially goes to Choi, but feel free to jump in. In your career, Edward, You have developed both industrial and academic research in the field of AI for healthcare at Google Brain and then now at KAIST. From your point of view, what's the main similarities and difference between these two environments? The first question, then, given the ever-increasing computing and data requirements for modern AI, which is often only available in big tech companies, how do you think that small academic groups in academia or also in hospitals can produce competitive research in the field? And lastly, given the importance of healthcare in general for society as a whole, do you see any risks of this dominance of the industry in the AI for healthcare as well?
I'd like to answer each question one by one. So I can't use my industry experience as a representative experience in all industry, because I've only been in Google Brain and Google Health for like a year and a half, and it's a very liberal environment. You could basically do whatever I wanted to do because it was in the early stage. So the organization was very disorganized in a matter of speaking. So similarity being that in academia where I'm in KAIST and we don't have a university hospital. So I don't have access to medical records. And in Google, we also didn't have access to medical records because Google doesn't own a hospital. So both organizations, both groups, and in both places, we were always hungry for medical records, but we didn't have access to them. So we could only use open source data sets such as Mimic or EICU. And in that respect, it's pretty similar what we could do because we are only given the same data set, which is Mimic. And there's only so much you can do with Mimic, even if you're in Google. The problem that you can solve with Mimic data is very much constrained. But what you could do is you could use a lot of computers to expand your experiment and increase the for example, like model performance, or build a larger model, or maybe use with a regular with proper paper, you could try to mix it up with Google user data, such as Gmail, with very stringent protocol build. So, for example, when I was in Google, I used to run experiments on using like 2,000 CPUs at the same time. So 2,000 experiments all at once. So hyperparameter. When I was in Georgia Tech, when I was doing PhD, I could only run like 8, maybe 16 experiments at a time. But when I was in Google, I had like infinite amount of CPU resources. GPU was still like very scarce resources, but CPU is like a lot of them. So you could run almost like infinite amount of experiments, and you really speed your experiment up and then get faster results, and then write a paper about it and so such and such. So that was a good part. And I think that still hasn't changed between the comparison between industry and academia, is that if you're in a hospital, then you could do a lot of stuff with your own data, and then you could do the stuff that only you can do because other people don't have access to your data. Only you as a hospital have access to your data. So you can do particular research, which is good for you, but you don't have the compute or the resources or the skill. Maybe you don't have enough engineers as Google, so you don't have all the infrastructure. So the speed of research could be slower. The scale of the research could be smaller, but you still have access to it. So, and on the contrary, in the industry side, if you're like Google, Meta, Amazon, or what else, like Microsoft, they don't have access to medical records. So they still have to look for partners, and I think the partnership is growing stronger because of the advent of the large language models like GPT. So the medical field is now is a bit more opening up to the opportunity what the LLMs bring. So they are more open to partnerships than before. But still, large industries, large IT companies who have the infrastructure, the compute, the skilled engineers, all the things, the money, they don't have access to medical records. So I think it depends on where you want to be as a researcher. If you're really serious about healthcare research, making like direct impact to the patient treatment or medical practice, then you should be in hospital. If you want to scale things up and see how the AI can go, how far the AI can go with open source data, or maybe PubMed abstracts or clinical text from the open source repositories, then you should be in the industry. So I think it's totally based on your preference. I prefer to be in academia because this is personal preference, but in academia, you're your own master. But in industry, I mean, the leadership decides what to do with your own research. So you're not really at liberty to whatever you want to do. So I was only I was like one of the lucky ones who was in Google for a very brief period where the things were a little bit disorganized, so you could do whatever you wanted to do. So, but that's not always the case, especially with the recession. So there's a lot of layoffs. But personal preference, I'd like to be in academia. So second question is that directly relates to the first question. So how do I stay relevant? I wouldn't say competitive research is it's like a subjective term. Like anything could be competitive, but like you cannot compete with the capital. Like you cannot compete with Google or Meta or Microsoft when you're a professor of maybe 10 students under your wing. So that's not possible. And I don't think any academia or even hospitals can compete with OpenAI or Google or Meta or Microsoft because they just don't. There's only like maybe a handful number of organizations who have the kind of infrastructure, the number of engineers, all those stuff. So being competitive is probably not the right word to use it, but staying relevant, I think it's sort of doable. So large IT companies, they do have the resources, but they have to spend resources only to a goal that seems profitable in the future. Like they don't spend resources for human good, for example. They spend their resources to make even more money, to increase their stock prices. So they can only focus on very, very small field of research. But while you're in the academia, you can do whatever you want. So you can stay totally relevant by focusing on something that is not lucrative, so something that is not profitable in the near future, such as healthcare could be a good. I think as a healthcare researcher or AI for healthcare researcher, I think healthcare is a good fit in that respect because I think at least in Korea or in the United States, people haven't found a great way to make a lot of money out of healthcare, unless you're a pharmaceutical company. Like if you're an AI researcher focusing on healthcare and you try to build a startup company, you probably will. I think it's very likely that you will fail to make a lot of money. Maybe you can be bought by larger IT company, but making a lot of revenues would be very, very difficult. I don't think anybody has succeeded in Korea. At least in Korea, nobody has succeeded, and I think it's the same for many countries. Making gigantic amount of money out of healthcare is really, really hard. So, but there's definitely research value because it's for human good, and we all believe that healthcare is like basic human rights. So there's always need for better research. So as an academic researchers, you can focus on any of that field that where companies wouldn't do because it's not profitable. So, for example, I'd like to build data sets these days because evaluation, external validation, like clinical trial for AI, like all those like validation for AI is a very hot topic these days. How do we know that, for example, ChatGPT it knows what it says? How do we know that it can perform in some medical capacity? We need to test it, and the way that we test it is usually, as I said, building data set by building a very rigorous, very inclusive, very fair data set to poke it in a lot of different directions. So I'd like to stay relevant by building data sets and then contribute to the community. And I think that's one way to do it. And the last question is any risk of increasing industrial. As I said, I'm not sure if industry would have a lot of dominance in the healthcare space because, as I said, they wouldn't spend their money on something that is not profitable. And healthcare spaces, I think, is in a lot of countries, governments, state try to make it as equitable as possible. So I think there's like a conflict between where the company wants to make a lot of money and the government wants to make it as equitable as possible. So there's a big conflict between the two. So I don't see that. I fail to see in the near future where companies dominate the healthcare and then everybody has to be completely relying on, like, for example, Google AI or OpenAI AI, like ChatGPT. I think that's not going to happen anytime soon, but I might be wrong there. So this is kind of the things that I'd like to get some feedback from either the panels or maybe from the audience, because I could be totally wrong about this.
Any other? I see. And a quick intervention there. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I was triggered with the third question. Of course, I'm part of industry, but of course, Philips is a small player compared to the Googles this world. At the same time, yesterday there was also a panel discussion, and there the discussion was you have three parts. You have data, you have the compute power, and you have the brains. So if I look at the industry, and you were also mentioning that the industry doesn't have access to a lot of data. They have, of course, at least some part of the industry has the compute power, and brains distributed across different companies, so they are strong there. Data part, they are not. So maybe I'm provocative now. I can make the third question to a different one. I would almost say, because it all starts with the data, I would say the dominance is at the hospital side, not industry side. But that's from my perception. So maybe some reactions from the panel.
Shall I go first?
I just wanted to add that we are speaking about three bricks, three Lego: the data, the hardware, the competence, the teams. There are two Lego missing in this discussion, and these are the care professionals and the patients. And there are two important parts of it. And they are important in making sure that what we do is meaningful. And I have to review 10 to 20 papers every week for a journal. And 99% of these papers are nice science, but they are not meaningful. And I think that large work on using ECG to demonstrate that it is possible to have a pretty good performance to find the gender at analyzing the signal is a nice research question, but it's completely meaningful.
Meaningless.
Yeah, it's the same point I wanted to make. So the data alone, I think, is important, but the combination of knowledge about the data and to ask the right questions to answer meaningful things is actually the key. And that's why I also think that you can actually, with a small academic group, if you work together with the people who are actually going to use the algorithm, you can be very competitive. So this would be, very good point. And maybe another point, I noticed similarities and differences actually also have been some time in the industry. We are not able to pay the people how they deserve it, or how the industry does pay them. So this is really, I think, a problem. As long as there is a intrinsic motivation and incentive, like getting a PhD, this is fine, but keeping people for a longer time than in academia, and not everyone can become professor, is kind of hard, because at least in Germany, we need to follow certain regulations, and even if we want to, we cannot pay them more. So this is for me one disadvantage of academia.
As for Her's question on maybe the hospital could be the dominating factor, not the industry, I kind of when I talk to researchers in IT companies in Korea, or researchers in medical hospitals, or researchers in academia, I usually say that the hospital will dominate because they have the data and nobody can take it away from them. And it's easier for hospitals to hire mediocre engineers who can develop fairly good LLMs than large IT companies to buy hospital data without going to a lawsuit or something. So I think, I kind of personally agree that hospital will be the dominator of this whole healthcare AI in this, because, as I said, the hardware is going to be cheaper. The electricity will be cheaper with nuclear fusion, hopefully, and there will be a lot of AI graduate students in 5 to 10 years, and the hospital just needs to wait. They just need to wait not do anything until everything gets cheaper, and then they will just buy 800 GPUs at really cheap price, and hire 100 okay-ish engineers, and then they can do whatever they want. So the only way to stop that from happening, in my opinion, is for citizens to actually rebel against that, because there was an issue in Korea whether the question is the medical records in hospital, do they belong to the doctors who collected it, or do they belong to the patients who provided it? And it went all the way to like Supreme Court or whatever, like in the very high up the chain of the legal issues, whatever. And the final decree, the decision was that it belongs, in principle, it belongs to the patient, to the citizens of Korean nation government. To South Korea. So based on that, people can really make their voices heard by saying, when the hospitals go like completely crazy with owning data and trying to make a lot of money out of it, citizens can form a group or like non-government organizations and then try to stop them, and then have the fruit shared by everyone because it belongs to the citizens in the end. I think that is probably the only way. But before that to happen, I think that's going to happen very, very late down the road, maybe 10 years later, 15 years later. But before that happens, I think hospital will have a very good time having dominance over, like monopoly over the data, and then doing whatever they want, and then just commanding or giving orders to IT companies who are hungry for data. I think that's very likely.
Okay, thank you. So I would like to stress the point that what was just raised. So benefit of AI-based innovations for patients and healthcare, and asking the question to Jens. So I was shortening it a bit because of the time. So I was just asking the middle question, the one in the middle, the second one. But of course, you can also say something about AI.
I'm sorry, we have a question here.
So about the industry dominance, I'm not sure if it is like 100% thing, because like we know that industry can come up with, okay, you can take this and monitor your blood glucose level, and because of your walking habit and daily habit, we can monitor where this using a smartphone or a smartwatches, and then we can give you the idea of this thing, and then maybe they can come up with very small device or chip that can give you further insight, and they can sell that, okay, with this thing we can predict these many diseases and possibilities, so that you can go to the doctor and check up. So I'm not sure, because as the things are advancing, we may have very minor devices, and using those things we can predict some futures. So like in the near future or in a couple of decades, it could dominate. Yeah, I agree that with respect to the hospital, because they will have much more data, but even these minor data could be quite important, and using these things slowly with the innovation industry may start dominating like after several decades or so. I mean, this is just my.
Thank you.
Yeah, I try to answer short, and also maybe a mixture of all these questions. So it's probably, I don't know if you have to answer how AI-based innovations will help. It's rather a question of when, actually. So there are very few examples which really result currently in a benefit for both patients and healthcare workers. So, but I think this will come, and it's what I mentioned earlier. So a better treatment, better diagnosis on the one side, and keeping also staff shortage in mind to reduce the time of workflows and also waiting times, for example. So optimizing the entire patient journey. And maybe adding to this that I always like to distinguish between we can use AI tools for business intelligence, which actually makes the hospital more profitable, reduces waiting times and things like this. And on the other hand, we also have medical intelligence, where we can get insights from the data. For example, the screen patients which have diabetes or pre-diabetes, and we see it in the lab values, but they're there for a fracture or something else, and no one really pays attention to this because they're admitted to the hospital for a different reason. And then we can use the machine and algorithms, AI or just normal predictive algorithms, to actually pinpoint the people treating them to this. So there's quite a big potential there, and it will come. And as I said, I think it will be linked to reimbursement to really approach the patients. And maybe another point I wanted to make, we are currently also companies, we're currently having very narrow AI solutions that we either for 510 approval or which we are using. So meaning there's a tool that is able to detect the nodule in the chest X-ray. There's another tool that is able to segment a liver tumor. Yet another tool able to determine bone age from a hand radiograph and so forth. And this is not how medicine works, right? So we as I mentioned earlier, we see the entire patient. We even talk to the patient to find out what's going on. And there is the chance of this generalized medical AI models, which is also proposed by several people in the literature, that then are able to really be a companion to the physician, where you can reason with and where you can get suggestions and also bring the patient in the end to specialists quicker than we are currently doing that. So having an odyssey in the hospital, no one knows really what's going on, and I believe that this generalist medical AI models can help giving staff shortage, and that if you're specialized on the heart, you're not good with teeth, for example, or so a dentist area, and to bring all this together, I think medical AI can help, and this is probably where I see it going in the next iteration, maybe the second summer of AI, when we have the general medical AI models.
And maybe just for the sake of time, we have 5 minutes, but we got 15 minutes from Steven. Since this discussion has gone so well, so I'm going to cut you there. I'm going to pose one more question, and then we bring to the audience. Okay, so my question now goes to Matt from Find. Matt, as you know, low to middle income countries, which accounts for 85% of the global population, as you said, they are 92% of the global burden of disease, according to pre-COVID statistics from the WHO. And then my question is about the topic is AI and fairness. How can patients and healthcare providers in limited resource regions benefit from AI-driven technologies, given the resource required, the expertise required? How do you fear that, or do you fear that AI could increase actually the social divide that we have right now? And is there a way to mitigate it by the work, for example, of science and industry to address this issue?
It's a simple question to answer in 5 minutes. So I think, this is right where Find is working, and we think about this regularly. I do think fundamentally, we've been talking all day about data. I think when you look at the complexities around data access in many, especially in the last mile, in primary healthcare settings, in low and middle income countries, predominantly in Africa and those with less resources, you see medical records which are still paper-based. You see limited connectivity. You also see a lot of skepticism around data sharing for obvious reasons, given sort of the complexities, at least in Africa, around healthcare and data and sovereignty. And so I do think we talked about bringing the patient first and focusing on them. That's very much our approach at Find, is working with patients and providers to try to understand their needs and to try to bring industry to the table to adapt existing models to address their needs, ideally with some of the creative solutions we've heard around transfer learning and federated learning in the future. But for now, using and sort of leveraging databases like Find, where we have a lot of medical images. We have, in adults, we have about 12,000 chest x-rays that are curated with a lot of high quality metadata, using some of those in a way that benefits those people. But I think when we talk about the digital divide, I think that's something that keeps me up at night. This idea that we're accelerating and we're hearing all these multimodal data approaches that are present in Switzerland and are certainly present where I was in the States. But I think we need to think about how to adapt those and how to work with LMIC partners to bring them to them and to get their data so that it addresses their populations and their needs. And I think the way to do that, at least, when we talk about funding models, I think everyone's talking about reimbursement. If you look at diagnostics for TB, for instance, there are 2 or 3 global procurement agencies that account for about 95% of the purchase of TB diagnostics globally. So there, it's a much more consolidated effort where FIND can work with some of these partners to try to help with selection and sort of choosing these products as well. So it's bringing the stakeholders to the table. It focuses on the use cases that are of highest need for people in LMICs who are considering adoption of these tools, and then sort of a work with policy and with procurement agencies to make sure that informs the decision. So.
Thank you very much. Like that, we close the first round, right, Kirsten, of questions. So now we can move on to the audience. Maybe if you have questions. Okay, and also speak. So.
Hi, I've got a question about AI and drug discovery that I think is sort of relevant to this most immediate point, this last point here, but also to the question about sort of economics that's been discussed elsewhere. So it's not about patient care, but there are some diseases that the market fails to provide incentives to companies for in doing drug discovery. And one of the things that was talked about in yesterday's sessions is the idea that you might have a CERN-like kind of international group of AI researchers that do things that are of public benefit. And one possible application for that, for instance, talked about a little bit by the Global Partnership in AI, and something that Joshua Benjo is involved in, is working in the area of drug discovery for instance, things like antibiotics or the things that don't get a lot of attention by commercial drug companies. Maybe you could comment on that.
Sure, yeah. I think, again, FIND's focus is around diagnostics, so we do less around therapeutics and drug discovery. But it is an area that, we have partners that we work with who are exploring. I don't have a simple answer to that question. I'm not from pharma, but the process of selecting and then demonstrating proof of benefit is super complicated. There are complexities around sort of the top-down decision regarding funding from like the Gates Foundation and their decisions around what they do and don't support. That being said, the Gates Medical Research Institute is essentially a pharma company helping develop some of these new therapeutics for TB, for malaria, and for other high burden global diseases, antibiotics for pneumonia. And they do that including use of AI, I know, in some of those technologies. So I do think there is some traction there. But, it's any of these conversations when you talk about LMICs are also about where the money's from and where the prioritization is going to come from. And I think that involves political will, involves sort of this complicated dynamic. But yeah, there are some initiatives. I think it's the short answer, not nearly enough. Even in the field of TB, we could talk for a while about the lack of new high quality TB drugs. But I'm curious to see where that goes with Gates and with other initiatives like that.
Yes, hello. I'm a computer scientist. I actually work in AI. And I also have a question, maybe it's a bit related, because I saw most of the discussions here are focused on treating patients and helping hospitals use AI to treat patients, but not much about preventing. Is there a topic why this is not addressed? Should this be a priority maybe instead of to focus on not arriving to the point that we need to treat, but mostly to try to prevent? And I think there is a lot of things going on in this field that where AI could be of use. Thank you.
I can only agree. I think it's one of the biggest topics we are going to face in the next years is actually to work on prevention, to detect diseases before they actually happen. So totally agree. We are in a hospital. Unfortunately, the people that are there are already sick or diseased. But at least in Germany, also the initiatives are to connect the university centers with outpatient stations, but also with the patients directly, so that in the one end we have, or at one point we have real world data, also containing, of course, data from healthy, and then we can use it for prediction models. But a very important topic.
This could be only pertaining to Korea, but when I talk to medical school students, they say that even what they learn is like 90% treating and maybe 5% preventive. So even the medical schools, like the doctors are not trained to practice preventive medicine. So I think it's very hard to ask AI to do it when there's not enough data for it to begin with. And I think it's very hard to, another reason that it's really hard to pull off is because if something didn't happen by prevention, then we don't know, because it's counterfactual. So we don't know what would have happened. So it's really hard to charge someone by AI. Like 2 years ago, my medical AI model predicted that you will have this. So I told you to get a lot of exercises and now you're healthy. So you need like some money, and nobody will actually agree to pay you that amount of money because there's a lot of factors going in for preventing disease. And I think it's very hard this all relates to counterfactual and causal inference, which is very, very difficult topic to pull off in machine learning.
So from what I know, there are companies already in US who actually make you a subscription in which you have to regularly go and check out. And based on the monitoring, they actually are able, using AI, to direct you where you might get sick. So you start doing preventive things before getting sick. I don't know, it's just a topic. I'm not an expert in this field, but it was just a curiosity why people are not focusing more on this topic.
Yeah, and well, I'd be curious to hear what others have to say, but purely the clinician in me too, wondering about secondary to prevention as an area where there is a clear correlation. So primary prevention, you never had disease. Secondary prevention, maybe you've had a heart attack and you're presenting another one. So that's a higher risk population. Those feel like low-hanging fruit for trying to use technology to improve or alter lifestyle to, then tangibly decrease the risk of these follow-up events. But I don't know.
But maybe just to come back to your questions, I think first, there are some very large initiatives in the world that are not AI-driven, but more on building data, such as Odyssey and other, where there are very, very large data sets on observational studies that are all usable, so to say. And they should be more used by the AI community because they are there. You don't need to do a specific AI task force. You just should start to use what is available, and there is a lot. Second, if you take prevention, you don't need AI. If you work on tobacco, nutrition, and activity, you will massively decrease medical problems. And for that, we don't need any data-driven anything. We need a lot of other stuff. And just look at the tobacco in Switzerland. We could decide this year in the parliament that it was not more allowed to do marketing for tobacco for minor children. So if we can only do that in 2023 from a political level it means that it's not a data problem, something different. And maybe the last thing, when you speak about AI, I think we should be very careful at not mixing AI and data-driven learning, machine learning driven by data, such as deep learning. There is a lot we can do for prevention just because we know exactly what has to be done. We should just apply it.
Very good. I have maybe one last question that's online, and it would be good that Antoine was here. It's about as models like ChatGPT and others are becoming more and more intelligent and smart. And then the idea like how we can, individuals, is the question about individuals, but maybe about healthcare professionals, how to also make them more intelligent and aware of these tools, how to use them, like how can we educate the medical professionals to actually work with these new AI tools. And that's the question that we have online here. To ensure that how can we make sure that people or healthcare professionals move forward and become more intelligent and smart in terms of use of media and information literacy? I guess it's
So it's a question about how healthcare professionals can become more literate in a digital manner and how they can use new tools to improve their medical practice. I think that's a nice closing topic, because we also started, the panelists who left mentioned the importance of educating healthcare professionals and the medical field about the use of AI, and I think that's extremely important. I would also like to touch on a question that was raised by the audience earlier about whether it's useful or not to have some AI questions, because then data scientists or engineers, they really try to mine a lot of data and have AI questions, and sometimes they come up with questions that are not even interesting and sometimes even harmful. So I think this is a bi-directional education that needs to happen on the medical field and also on the engineering field about what is important and what a clinical practitioner would need.
I think everything is said. I mean, if you look to America, Eric Topol was like a big influencer, to put it this way, in the field of digital medicine. I think he coined now 2016 or so the expression information specialist. That's a new kind of physicians we need to raise, basically, that also know how to deal with algorithms and the results and to communicate this to the patient. So this is a very important topic that we need to address.
So I would like to close the panel now. So thanks a lot for coming here, all panelists. Antoine had already to leave. Thanks again for coming here, for answering all our questions. And from my personal point of view, one term that turned up again and again was the term cultural change. So maybe this is something we can take out and discuss later on, so that cultural change is needed in different levels, so from different perspectives. It was mentioned and discussed here to achieve actually that AI in healthcare can contribute to support patients and physicians and contribute to health of the population. So thanks again to all of us, and have a good lunch. I think it's next.